What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Avengers versus X-Men versus Eternals. Man, let me tell you something. Okay, look, here's the thing, man. This story, son. Dude, I love this so much. This has one of the greatest moments ever in a Marvel comic story. It's absolutely mind-blowing. So check this out. In the last video that we did, we basically covered this whole thing where in order to stave off their destruction at the hands of the Eternals, because they were quite readily losing, that you basically had Tony Stark and you had some of the Eternals who didn't ally with Druig, who's trying to wipe out pretty much all the X-Men, right? He's the leader of the Eternals, that they reactivated the Progenitor Celestial, right? He's all Frankenstein, kind of hodgepodge from different pieces. But as soon as the Progenitor Celestial manifested, right? As soon as he showed up, he was just like, let the conflict end. And I'm judging everybody on this planet. I'm judging you individually, and I will judge you as a collective. If I judge in favor of you, you will be able to continue your existence on Earth. If I judge against you, I will kill everybody here, right? I will eradicate all life on this planet, and it's game over. Act accordingly. So what happens here, and this is one of the coolest things, right? What happens here is you basically have the Progenitor Celestial analyzing everybody here, right? Looking over every single person. And the first person he hones in on is Captain America, right? He literally says, once more, Captain America seeks to inspire. He thinks himself a leader, one who sets the drumbeat for the world. I will judge him first. And so he basically appears, or at least kind of manifests, this sort of perfect looking Captain America type thing and says, you are a dream of a better country, right? That's literally what you represent, a better America. You have tried to inspire it for a century. This country is the world leader, and the world is what it is. It is worse every single day. You, Captain America, have failed. Captain America initially rejects this and is like, we're not playing this game, right? We're not doing the game with this stupid thing. We're basically blowing off all of this. And so in the end, he's like, we need to figure out how it is that we're basically going to satisfy the judgment of this Celestial on a broader scale. Now, that's one of the cool elements of Captain America. Very rarely does Steve Rogers ever succumb to like mind games and shadow tricks, right? That almost never works on Steve Rogers. Not because he's immune to it, right? Like a telepath could screw up the mind of Steve Rogers with relative ease, right? What makes Steve Rogers so cool is that he has this level of fortitude and this level of leadership that is respected by everybody in pretty much the entirety of the Marvel Universe. But the thing about this is we basically transition over to the exclusion zone. Now remember, the exclusion zone is basically where Eternals are resurrected when they die, or it's where they're held prisoner. Specifically, we have Druig, who again is the leader of the Eternals, which have basically fractured. So you've got Druig, who's leading a group of Eternals and pretty much most of the Eternal Empire that wants to destroy the mutant population because they're quote unquote excess deviation. Remember, that's one of the big things the story's doing, is this establishing that mutants didn't just arbitrarily come into existence. They're basically humans that have a deviant gene and have just developed powers as a result of that. But Druig is literally talking here to Uranos, and Uranos wants to be set free. Now remember, in the last few videos that we did, we saw how powerful Uranos was. He showed up to Mars, which is a settlement that has mutants on it, but not just any mutants. They're all Omega level mutants, right? The most powerful of the mutant race. And he killed like 98% of them in 1 hour. That's how powerful that guy is, right? He's just on a whole new level of strength. It's kind of crazy. What we end up having in this conversation is, of course, Uranos, who says, okay, the Celestials already judged Captain America and found him to be a failure. So now the question is, how long before it judges everybody else? And in reality, it's kind of a race against time here, because the perception of Druig and those Eternals who were on his side is that our mission as Eternals is to correct quote unquote excess deviation, which only ever comes in two forms. Either it's deviants who have like basically mutated further and they have to be destroyed. They become deviants that basically kill other deviants and even Eternals, or it's humans with a deviant gene that have developed powers, i.e. mutants. And the fact that he's like, we haven't killed basically every mutant on Earth, that's the failure of our charter. That's why it will judge against us. And so his stance is we have to eradicate them as fast as possible. Now, where you do have the Druig-led Eternals, which are like, we have to kill basically all the mutants on Earth if we possibly can. And then you've got those Eternals that are working against him. Tony Stark basically working alongside the Eternals that stand on the side of the X-Men, along with basically Mr. Sinister, who's a mutant that they kidnapped. Ultimately, Tony Stark's approaching this from the perspective of like, how do we shut down that Celestial? Now, one of the things to remember here is Tony Stark has experience with this. Don't forget the God Killer armor, right? The God Killer armor was a suit of armor, really was just kind of a giant robot that was developed by the Aspirants when they originally went to war with the Celestials at the beginning of all of creation. That 24 25,000 foot tall piece of metal that was controlled by Tony Stark. He's also created armors that allow him to tap into celestial energy, right? To basically control a celestial. So he's well aware of like how to deactivate these things. The problem is even those Eternals who were on the side of the X-Men are like, no, because the reality of this is the Eternals see the Celestials as like their prophesized beings. They don't really agree with what the Celestial's doing, but they believe the best way to overcome the judgment of Earth is to basically unify the world, not to destroy the Celestial itself. But the other part of this is their programming. Remember, Eternals were created by Celestials, and the result of this is that the programming of the Eternals is that if a Celestial is on Earth and if it is in danger, they have to respond. It'll override their conscious thoughts. They'll literally just become robots basically that have to run through and save a Celestial and destroy whatever threat is standing against them. And that's kind of where you have these two groups at odds. Tony Stark thinks the best possible thing is to destroy it. These Eternals that are on the side of the Avengers and the X-Men just refuse to let that happen. And so what you end up doing is, again, jumping back to Krakoa, where you have the X-Men, basically the most powerful mutants on Earth, who are standing against the Hex. Now remember, one of the things that had happened here in this story, this whole Avengers X-Men Eternal story, is it basically removed the Eternals from just being a handful of people who live on Earth and sometimes they get involved in stuff, and instead it turned them into a whole society. And one of the things that we learned is that the Hex are basically the foot soldiers, right? They're like the special forces guys of the Eternals. They're enormous. They're as big as skyscrapers, but like they're the ones the Eternals dispatch if things get really, really bad. They have to go to war and basically just run over some enemy with overwhelming force. And that's what they have to do with Krakoa, because some of the most powerful beings in existence in the mutant population, and even just at all in Marvel Comics, are in Krakoa. So they have to approach accordingly. And so for the most part, the X-Men are literally fending off as best they can. And you even have Destiny, who can kind of see the future depending on how far out she's looking, who basically meets with Emma Frost, one of the most powerful telepaths on Earth, and is like, we need to basically have some kind of a meeting. But the reality here is Emma Frost is like, I mean, we can, but just keep in mind, like, while we're telepathically communicating, we're also fighting out here on the battlefield. Destiny basically says, okay, like, I've looked through the various options, and the only way for us to really come out on top here is to launch a strike force against the Celestial, because I've seen what happens with this battle. And if we continue fighting like this, we will lose. Because the reality here is that every time a mutant dies, sure, we can resurrect ourselves, but we basically have to be fed information on what happened, which is secondary knowledge. When an Eternal dies and they're resurrected by the Great Machine, they remember everything, right? They remember every single thing. The experiences, not only that, they learn, they correct and they learn, which means they are going to get the upper hand on us at some point in time. This battle cannot keep going on or they will kill us all. So launching this strike force is the only way to do it. Now, initially, some of them are kind of against it. They're like, no, we should not do that. Like, we should not launch a strike force and try to destroy a Celestial, because what if it doesn't work? Like, what if we try to blow up a Celestial and it doesn't work? He's gonna eradicate us all. Right? He's gonna kill us all just for pissing him off. And that's exactly the real concern to have here. But the other part of this is that some of the mutants there are like, but it's a risk worth taking. It's one worth doing. And so what you end up having is also Emma Frost, who says, yes, but we also have a third option, right? Here on Krakoa, we've been waging war or fighting against the Eternals, and we can only fight for so long. But there is a force out there that we have not tapped into yet that will ally themselves to our cause. And that's when you transition over to the Krakoan gates. Now remember, only those who have a mutant gene can pass through the Krakoan gates. And if there were any doubt in Marvel Comics as to whether or not mutants are a genetic offshoot of the Deviants, this confirms it. This solidifies that it's an absolute truth, because the other force that Emma Frost was referring to are the Deviants themselves. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that Deviants are as powerful as Eternals under any normal circumstance. And depending on what Deviant you're talking about, some of them are more powerful than the Eternals. So literally what you have is Emma Frost, who has basically made bargains with the Deviants, and an entire army of Deviants comes swelling in. To give you guys perspective here, remember at the end of Avengers Endgame when you had like just what was left of the Avengers facing off against like the entire army of Thanos, and then all the portals start opening up, and basically every superhero that we've ever seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe up to that point all emerges at the same time. That's this. That's basically what's going on here. And so what this does is it drastically evens the odds. But even then, the prophecy of destiny remains. We cannot keep this battle going forever. We will inevitably lose. And so what this does is it switches back over to Tony Stark and the Eternals who are all talking. And Tony Stark is adamant about this idea, right? Like, we have to find a way to destroy the Celestial, but the Eternals simply won't let him. And in truth, there's not really anything Tony Stark can do to overcome the power of the Eternals, right? They're just way too capable for him. But in the midst of all this discussion that's going on, Mr. Sinister, ever the manipulator and the schemer, ends up going over to one of the computer panels and basically exposes a node for the Celestial itself, that if it's attacked with enough energy, will blow the whole thing up. The big concern here is, if they do that, what kind of collateral damage are they looking at, right? Say, for example, they detonate this Celestial. Say, for example, this Celestial does get blown up by some capacity. Millions of people in the immediate vicinity will die. But the stance of Mr. Sinister, and even Tony Stark to a degree, is yes, but future billions will live, right? This is just classic utilitarianism. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. There's no argument about that. There's no discussion about that, right? Like, that's just the way that it has to go. Now, again, while Sinister's doing that, you actually end up having the Eternals realizing that there's a secondary breach that's taken place here, that basically there's infiltrators. Some kind of a strike team has arrived to their location and is infiltrating the Celestial. And that's basically because of what's going on here, because the Celestial itself is now in immediate danger by way of the actions of Mr. Sinister, and the fact that Wolverine and Jean Grey and those guys have arrived as a strike force. The programming takes over, and immediately the Eternals turn on the X-Men, right? Those who were on the scene, and immediately attack them all, right? Like, literally just, it's like this massive battle that takes place between all of them, right? These most powerful mutants that exist in Marvel Comics, alongside, facing off against these Eternals. The war is extreme and it is harsh. And that's the crazy thing. At the end of the day, the X-Men, in kind of a last-ditch effort, are able to pull off the attack, and they destroy the Celestial, which lets off this just colossal atomic explosion that eradicates millions of people, and then it ends. Then it stops. And then suddenly they realize the Celestial's not gone. The Celestial's there intact. And that's when Jean Grey comes to the realization none of that actually happened. There was no colossal battle. There was no major war. They were literally just shown by this Celestial what would have happened had they pulled off that attack. This is a strike against them, because what it means is that the population of Earth would rather have destroyed millions of people than find some peaceful resolution to their conflict. And so the Celestial doesn't necessarily use that as a sign of judgment and say, I judge against the entirety of the human race. But what it does do is it literally says, okay, it communicates with the entirety of the world, and it says, everybody on Earth, you need to know this, right? I have shown you, every single person on the face of the planet, I have shown you what this explosion would look like, and I've shown you the damage that it would do. You need to know that the people on this Earth, right, the superheroes that stand before you, that they see themselves as being gods above judgment. Now, all of you see that they are mistaken. Your day ticks away. You've got 24 hours to prove yourself. Remember, that was a statement the Celestial made. You have 24 hours to prove to me that you're a race worth saving. Your day ticks away. Justify yourself. That's a really, really important thing to understand, because to give you guys perspective here, Jean Grey is an immensely powerful telepath, right? On a universal scale. And the fact that a Celestial was able to just trick her and every other telepath on Earth into believing that what they were seeing was real is a testament to its level of power. That's why I say this is the most powerful Celestial to ever exist, because it's a combination of a multitude of other Celestials. And so what it does is it presents this scenario, kind of talking to us more as the reader than anything else, that it says more judgments, right? Thumbs down for the Woman of Diamond, for Emma Frost, right? She's one that probably deserves a thumbs down. She's kind of a prick. Thumbs up for the Deviant Warlord, right? Thumbs down for the woman who walks between futures and the woman who walks beside her, right? Destiny and her lover Mystique, that is going through each of these individual people and is judging in favor of them or against them. Now, the reality of this is that when it says, I will judge you individually and then I will judge you as a collective, what this seems to indicate is that each person is basically a tally. Thumbs up, thumbs down. If there are more thumbs downs across the entire spectrum of the human race than there are thumbs up, everybody gets destroyed, right? If there's more strikes against humanity than for humanity, or if there are more evil people in the world than good people, the world will end. If not, the world will be allowed to continue on. And so what you have is there's this really cool moment where you basically have this discussion where it's like, okay, they communicate with Captain America. And what Captain America says is, look guys, like this whole thing of us waging war against each other, this is not gonna work. If we keep on doing this and we keep on fighting each other, that's gonna do nothing but cause problems. What we need is someone who can unify the world. What we need is someone who can bring the world together. Son. Check this out. He's like, what we need is somebody that can unify the world, right? God, dude, I love this moment so much. And so what this does is it switches over to Cersei. Now, Cersei has this idea. She ends up getting with Jack of Blades. Now remember, Jack of Blades is an Eternal who's an assassin, but knows how to get in and out of places that people aren't normally supposed to get in and out of. What he does is basically sneak her into the exclusion zone, into the Eternal's prison and resurrection chamber, right? Kind of serving both purposes. And as they get in there, there's this kind of conversation where she's like, yes, like we need somebody who's going to unify the entirety of the Earth's population. God, I'm so excited about this. So what they do is they make their way to a vault. And when this person is like, who's there? Cersei responds and says, we're here to break you out. I think we're in terrible trouble and I think you can help. Someone to get the world singing from the same hymn sheet. Now I know this is Eternals business, but some of us have never been just Eternals. And I thought that perhaps it's time for a little of the old Avengers to assemble. And what we end up finding out is the person she's talking to is Eros, also known as Star Fox. For those of you guys who don't know why this guy is so important, Eros has the ability to manipulate the emotional states of people. What Eros could do, if his powers are pushed to the limit, what he could do is literally unify the entire world, even if it's against their will. The question you have to ask here is this the final straw? Because if Eros comes along and he manipulates the world into experiencing a sense of harmony and unification, will the Celestial see through it? Will he know it's an illusion? Or will they end up taking the powers of Eros and using it on a Celestial? Which begs the question, can he even do that? But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.